You enjoyed your lovely lunch, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our session on independent living. For those of you who don't know, I'm a disability activist for over the last 20 years within Ireland, and I've done a number of high profile media events to do with independent living and what it means to have personal assistance. Happy to say I'm now the peer mentor within Independent Living Movement Ireland, or ILMI as we're known. My main job is to support individuals with a disability to live a life of their choosing, whether that be moving to one's own home or living independently in whatever way they see fit. And I'm very excited about our wonderful panelists. So we're going to start off with John Butler. Dr. John Butler is a psychologist, manager with the Cope Foundation, and has a special interest in the application of social theory and public policy to a clinical practice. John has over 25 years' experience supporting and working with people with an intellectual disability. John is also chair of the board of directors of Gay Project Prosperous, and he goes by him, her, he, him. My apologies. Over to you, John.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think Shelley and I are coming from the land of Tiernan Oak, the land of youth, because Shelley says she's doing 30 years as a advocate and facilitator. I've got over 25 years, but neither of us really look at that age group, I think. So
No.
I'm going to go with that anyway. So just like to thank everybody for coming today, and just to hope that you enjoyed the session. Looking forward to maybe some questions afterwards. I'm going to present today on a bit of research that I did recently, and I suppose at the start of that research, I asked participants an awful lot of questions, so I suppose and asked them to share about themselves. So it's appropriate just to say a little bit about myself. So my name is John, and very grateful that I'm from Cork, and really appreciative for that. Thank you for the person who acknowledged that. 53 years of age, and again, I think it's important just sometimes to share where you're coming from, because we ask sometimes research and our participants in research very personal questions without always sharing ourselves. I'm a psychologist. I really like hiking, cycling, watching TV. I'm a gay man myself and partnered. I'm a brother. I have one sister and she always likes to be mentioned, so I put her up on the slide. And I'm a son as well. And I suppose it's about putting that up just to contextualize that I'm a person, and the person that I speak about with disability are people as well, with their own background, their own interests, their own relationships and connections. I think it's just important to kind of emphasize that in a way. So we've had lots of presentations yesterday and today with a very strong focus on rights and legislation. I suppose mindful of the UNCRPD, and I suppose maybe for me in terms of the presentation that I'm speaking to, I suppose looking at Article 19, that right to live independently in a place of one's own choosing, with freedom to choose and control our own lives, and also maybe Article 23, which references respect for home and family, with an emphasis on equal rights to marriage, family, and personal relationships. So I suppose they might be two of the articles of the convention that I might look at. And then in an Irish context, I suppose we've got the recent ADMA Act, which is a new act in terms of determining capacity and decision making. And we have a whole suite of other legislation in relation to equality on the statute books as well. So I suppose within that, then, I suppose that what they're emphasizing in a way is that, again, through rights and active citizenship, people with intellectual disability are really empowered to be part of their own community, to play an active part in that community, and to live a life full of their own choosing. And I suppose the rights-based approach works to maintain and promote human and citizenship rights for people with disability, and to ensure that they have equal access to those rights. But I suppose our own experience, I suppose my experience as a clinician and my experience of working with people with intellectual disability and their lived experience of that is that that's not always the case, or it's not always the lived experience for people. So while the HSE, HICWA, and other bodies and legislation really put a strong emphasis on us promoting autonomy, rights, and citizenship of people to live ordinary lives in ordinary places. But the reality then is that people with intellectual disability who live lives that are mediated, influenced, and shaped not only by legislation, but also by changing and evolving models of understanding and interpretation of what it means to be a person with intellectual disability. I think just going back to some of the presentations this morning and yesterday afternoon, everything is okay once the person with a disability does what we think they should be doing. But when they strive to do something slightly different or something of their own choosing, we become maybe paternalistic, protectionist, or that we say we don't have the resources for that. So whilst on one hand, we're saying we're all for rights, empowerment, and autonomy, and then the other side is saying, but not yet, or maybe not in that way. So it can be very difficult, I think, for people with intellectual disability to negotiate some of these type of experiences. And in the research that I did, sorry, I'm just going to put those there. I've only started recently wearing glasses and I'm never sure if I need them or not, but the print on the screen is large enough, so I think I'm okay today. So that's my hidden disability. But so just in the research that I did recently, one of the key things that came up in it was just how a person with disability creates that identity of having a disability and how that then shapes their interaction with the world and how it actually influences other parts of identity development. And so I just did a small bit of looking at disability identity. And again, if we look at social identity theory, individuals with disability develop and construct their sense of self by committing to their in-group and then by making a series of comparisons between that in-group and other out-groups. And the research would tell us that it frequently results in negative self-concepts, feelings of marginalization, stigmatization, increased mental health need. But that's not always the case for people with disability, and it doesn't have to be the case. So for some people, by taking an understanding of their disability identity that is socially constructed, fluid, and taking consideration of context, it is possible for people with disability to take on multiple roles and identities which increased or decreased the significance attached to that disability label. And I suppose just one of the social construct theories that might apply to that is social role valorization, so that the social roles that people can ascribe to myself. And that's why I put up things like, that I like hiking, I like cycling, I'm a brother, I'm a son. All of those things have value separate to the disability or to whatever skills or abilities I might have. So again, the challenge for the person with disability, and so much as all of us, is to create that sense of coherent identity that facilitates an individual to adapt to their disability and then to navigate the associated social stressors and daily hassles. Because I suppose the reality is the lived experience for lots of people with disability is that it's not plain sailing. We recently recruited somebody with a mobility need in our workplace. And it was only when that person discovered that we actually realized how inaccessible our building was. We perceived it to be accessible, but when this person came, we then realized that it actually wasn't. And then the second part, I suppose, just that I was interested was that whole area around sexual identity and sexual development. And again, I suppose many people here are familiar with a lot of the literature on sexuality and people with intellectual disability. And there are lots of myths. Again, I think Anna mentioned this morning the myth of incapacity. And I suppose for many people with intellectual disability, there's the myth of asexuality, that people with a disability don't develop a full sexual identity, full sexual orientation, or full expression. Whereas many of us know that that's not the case at all, that people with disability do develop a full sexual identity of their own. And I suppose for adolescents and young people, there's a series of steps that they go through in terms of social exploration, identification, self-identity building, and the establishment of their core social values. But for the group of people that I was interested in, people who might have an intellectual disability and who might also then be LGBT, I suppose what the research is saying is that those individuals are also, I suppose, double marginalized or doubly stigmatized. And as they're particularly nuanced and are subject to dual discrimination and layered stigmatization. Again, I suppose, going back to earlier presentations, we see reduced access to things like sexuality education, or that education programs are monitored and modified to what we think might suit their emerging need rather than what they actually are looking for themselves. And also, I suppose, just the fact that Many children still are attending special schools away from their peers, away from their family. They might be attending special classes or special units within mainstream schools. So again, they've got reduced or different opportunities for social exploration or activity that others who don't have a disability might be able to access and identify. Again, just in terms of minoritized sexual identity development, there's a number of theories and models in relation to that. And I won't go into that slide in any great detail. I'll just focus on this one by Dillon et al. And again, what Dillon et al. Tried to do was to unify or bring different theories and models together. And again, it addresses the challenge of the gay-straight binary evident in many earlier models. And I suppose that there are two parallel processes that individuals are required or seem to go through. One is to develop an individual sexual identity developmental process, and then a social identity process as well. And within that then, Dillon would say that there are a number of stages that most people who do develop with a minoritized sexual identity, and in that I'm specifically mentioning gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transsexual as well, but there are 5 stages that people tend to go through. They don't always go through them in the same fashion. They don't always start with A. So what he says there is that they're non-linear and they're flexible. But there is that sense of compulsory heterosexuality that everybody seems to start with thinking, either I am or I must be straight or heterosexual. And then people go through episodes of active exploration, diffusion, deepening commitment, and synthesis into an overall sexual self-concept. So again, there's a lot of research in that, and I just put it there just to give a sense of, I suppose, what we think about what happens for people without a disability in mainstream settings, because a lot of the research that's done to date hasn't focused on individuals with intellectual disability. And then when we look particularly at the lives of people with the sexual identity and people with intellectual disability, what we really find, as I said, is that there's really no research done in a meaningful way in Ireland and in this area, and very limited research in a wider international context. And part of the challenges for that is that it's a small but very diverse population, and they're difficult to access and find. Again, with reference to earlier presentations, where people with disability don't have maybe autonomy over their bodily integrity and things like that, there's a very protective, paternalistic, gatekeeping system of service bodies, parents, legislator that would deny you getting access to these. And access sounds like the wrong word, but being able to meet, to engage with, to get information from them. And then I suppose the other part as well is that within our disability services, there's often marginalization and or invisibility of these individuals. And not only that, there's also, and it's slightly changing, but there's also marginalization and invisibility of staff with a minoritized sexual identity. So these things are all challenges to consider and for us to think about when we're supporting people. Adam from advocacy, we can't be what we can't see. Mm-hmm. So if you can't see people who are LGBT, it's very difficult for you then to become that, if that's what you think that you are or that you want to be. So again, it's very clear from the research that people with intellectual disability, that their sexual development is mediated, contextualized, and constructed by those supporting them. So again, there's a lot of control in people's environment. And again, I suppose what we have is that doubling down of disadvantage and marginalization. So again, people with disability are living in very much a heteronormative world where everybody is seen to be straight. It's a very ableist world. So again, the LGBT community is very ableist, and it has very particular archetypes or types that would be found to be attractive or not attractive, or that are acceptable or not acceptable. And very often, not only people with disability, but myself as well at times, don't fit those stereotypes. But it is particularly strong for people with intellectual disability, and that sense of where do they belong or where don't they belong. And again, I suppose it has also been mentioned by a number of speakers today, that importance of intersectionality and overlap. So the lived experience of people with disability and a minoritized sexual identity can be viewed in the context of interactional systems. So models of service provision, is it a very traditional based service? Is it a community based service? Is it a rights based service? Is it a resource based service? social and public policy and how, and again, as was referenced today and yesterday, it's great to have them on the legislature, but it's then how are they enacted and implemented, or how are they given effect? Disability identity theory and sexual identity theory. And I suppose we could also add in legal context, legal constructs, and how they interact there. So as I said, I undertook a piece of research last year or 18 months ago, and I suppose I had two particular research questions. One was, how do adults with intellectual disability who self-identify with a minoritized sexual identity or as a member of the LGBT community understand their own minoritized sexual identity? And what is that experience of intersectionality? So having both an intellectual disability and being LGBT. So what's that like, being both of those at the same time? Or are they those things at the same time? So just a little bit, just inclusion criteria. And again, it is important to go through ethics, but again, ethics is a form of gatekeeping as well. So individuals over the age of 18 who were no longer attending school, I chose to work with people and to recruit people who were in the mild or moderate range. And part of that was about my ability to engage, to communicate without needing somebody else to be involved in that process. Ability to give informed consent, and that ability to give consent was really important. But as well as the individuals giving consent, very often their organizations had to give a prior consent. So it was multiple levels of consent. And these were individuals who had identified with a minoritized sexual identity themselves. So I managed to get 10 individuals, which I thought was fantastic. And again, that's just a snapshot of their age, gender, and what their self-reported sexual identity was. And I'm going to give a few quotes from people in the next part of the presentation, but all of those quotes are anonymized, so the names don't relate back to individuals. So if you think you know the person, you probably don't. So I did a series of interviews with them, recorded the interviews, and then had to transcribe them. So these are just examples of some of the quotes I got. I have friends who are bi, lesbian, and gay. My cousin is gay. My sister goes both ways, and that was from Mary. I feel safe with other men. I'd be happy in most places. I have staff with me all the time. That was by Dave. Ian, well, I don't have a lot of LGBT friends. Most of my friends are straight. All of my friends are straight. I'm the only one that is gay. No gays here in this service anyway. It's mostly more in the city. And Ian was a person who was living in a rural part of a county. So I was fortunate I got participants from around the country, not just from Cork. So again, it was a broad national context of individuals. So I was able to, through the interviews, be able to break it down into a number of different themes. So theme one was becoming an adult in a heteronormative and ableist world. So the people themselves in their reporting back were very much around that they, in terms of their own disability identity, that they had to overcome difference. So a lot of them spoke about siblings being allowed doing things that they weren't allowed to do, being moved to special school without being really told why they were being moved to special school, not being able to get a paid job, or if they did get a paid job, that it was at the lower pay scale, or only for a certain number of hours. So there was that, and again, that everybody was straight. There was no real sense of that difference in terms of orientation or sexual identity. People spoke about that decision about whether to come out or not, and who to come out to, and what kind of influenced them in terms of coming out. That sense of that they couldn't be the only one, that there had to be other people like them who had a disability, who were also LGBT, and where and how could they find those individuals. And a number of the people that I spoke to stated that they were ready for what they termed sex and love, but that those supporting them weren't always ready for that, and that they were really in that tension point between creating autonomy, but also in what they called a shadow of fear almost, or being of that parentalistic support context around them. So I'm just going to go very quickly through some of the things. So just in terms of identity, everybody knew that they had an intellectual disability, but they really created social constructs around that in terms of how they described it, how they defined it. And very often they didn't name it in terms of a disability, but in terms of what supports they needed to access things. And it was similar in relation to their sexual identity. Again, what was very strong from the interviews with the people that I met was that the prevailing sense of a heteronormativity and compulsory heterosexuality, that it was almost predetermined that you were straight, that you were going to be male, that you were going to be female, and that issues around questioning gender, question orientation were kind of maybe behavioral challenges, things that you really weren't, that they weren't really making those as conscious decisions, that they didn't know what they were talking about. And again, what was interesting was that the active exploration of the participants' own sexuality was often through thinking, cognition, and emotion, rather than the sexual behavior. And again, part of that was that people didn't feel they had the opportunities to engage in sexual behaviors, or if they did, that those behaviors could become sanctioned, monitored, or under the control of others. People spoke a lot about that sense of wanting to become real, but also challenges with developing their own autonomy. And I suppose this is kind of where we're looking at things like rights restrictions, restrictive practices, and how we truly live and implement elements of rights-based legislation like the Convention on Rights. The other thing that was very evident as well is that depending on the level of ability that a person presented with, there was a different response from families and from staff. So people with more severe types of disability felt more control being exerted on them. And that's a serious thing for us all to reflect on and to take on board as well. There was a big discussion by lots of the participants about visibility and not seeing people in their own places, but also when they accessed LGBT spaces, that they really didn't feel that they belonged there either. As part of the research, in terms of the ethics approval, I had to make available resources if people became distressed. I've got a very kind timekeeper, so I'm going to be very polite to her. But so one of the things I did was that if I asked a number of local LGBT supports and services if they could become available to support people if they had questions or challenges. And none of the LGBT organizations have really engaged with this population before. They were very willing to get involved, but it was really a new sense of space for them. And one person spoke about that when he went to bars, people would come up to him because they found him attractive, but when he started to engage, they discovered that he had a disability, and then they quickly disengaged from him. So he felt very isolated and disempowered from that as well. So I'm going to go through this quickly. So just social relationships are important. And again, I'm sure the slides can be made available as well. So again, that issue around control is very important, and education is extremely important. And the fact as well is that people with disability are developing knowledge and expertise because of access to things like the internet, television programs. So they're learning to control that for themselves. So I'll leave it there. And again, looking forward to the other presentations on the panel and if there's any questions. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for that, John. Very insightful, and thank you for doing such research, because as you say, so many disabled people are being left behind. So hopefully your research will kick a bit more interest in the area and a bit more knowledge. Our next speaker will be Marianne Madad. Apologies for not know me too well. I'm not very good at pronouncing your surname. Marianne Madad is a media and communication professional in the area of social inclusion and arts and culture. She is active as a freelance journalist, filmmaker, writer, singer, and disability activist. Marianne is the founder of Disability Pride Ireland, a cross-disability persons organisation, and one of the organisers of Ireland's first Disability Pride and Power Parade, which was held in July 2023. She has been a prominent campaigner on issues such as DPOs and the implementation of the CRPD, personal assistance provision, and the Scrap the Green Paper campaign. Marianne holds a BA Honours in English Studies from Trinity College Dublin and an MA in Journalist from Technology University of Dublin. Over to you, Marianne.
So I'm here today mainly coming from a background as an activist, which means I live in a perpetual state of rage and frustration for all of these issues, and I have only so much patience to talk about any of them before I just want to get up and do something. And I think that's basically, I'm going to focus this whole presentation, if people are with me, on brainstorming solutions to some of the problems that we're facing. And the way I read this particular panel, I have mainly focused it a bit narrowly on personal assistance as a component of independent living. And I think the people in this room already understand the importance of personal assistance as a cornerstone to independent living and the dismal situation we find ourselves in here in Ireland in relation to our personal assistance service. Although the government will still claim that on the surface PA hours are increasing each year, we know what it's really like on the ground, how people are still being institutionalized in their own homes, young people are still wasting away in nursing homes, and how we have to fight battles for years in order to obtain personal support and then continue that battle to keep them and to get enough basic hours. And I'm talking here to a room full of bright, young, legal minds and passionate advocates. So rather than thinking of this as a speech or a talk, I'd like us to take advantage of this situation we have ourselves in and see if we can come together to brainstorm how we might best be able to progress the fight for independent living. Because we cannot progress anything alone. The disability rights movement is symbiotic, multi-layered, and composed of many different elements. We all have our parts to play, and in order to progress change, a movement must involve players at every level. Researchers and legal experts like yourselves have an important part to play in providing evidence to progress our case. Likewise, we must coordinate the involvement of politicians, disability organisations, and in particular DPOs, organisations led by disabled people. And I'm delighted that NUIG has invited so many speakers from DPOs this year. DPOs form the bedrock of the UNCRPD, tasked with monitoring its implementation, and we are on the front line stoking the flame of the disability rights movement and nurturing the disabled community as only disabled people can do ourselves when we come together. To me, the biggest factor in creating change, well, one of them, the part that I felt was a missing piece of the puzzle here in Ireland, was grassroots coordination from the ground up. For change to occur, it is necessary to create a groundswell pressure, amplified by the media, without which politicians have no incentive to implement anything or any of the changes that we so badly need, which we so badly know needs to happen. And unfortunately, as always, it's up to us, the people, the collective, to push for that change. And that's the meaning behind the name Disability Power Ireland. It stands for people power, disabled people power. That's the real aim of our Disability Pride and Power Parade for Disability Pride Month in July, not only to celebrate and uplift the disabled community and to foster a disability culture and identity, as John was speaking about, but to nurture people power, to get people on the streets again, to show that we are a force to be reckoned with, and essentially to unite the various elements of the disability rights movement and encourage collaboration between DPOs and disability organisations to bring us together as we are being brought together now today in this room. Because anytime disabled people and allied keepers of the flame of the disability rights movement come together, magic can happen. The Scrap the Green Paper Coalition came out of this fostering of cross-DPO collaboration and was the perfect example of how change can be led effectively when we work together, pushing from the ground up. It worked because we had a very specific goal. We utilised protesting and the media, who have a duty to cover such events. We enlisted the aid of politicians to raise these matters in the Dáil, in PQs and motions, as the only way to put pressure on a government which simply will not do anything otherwise. Likewise, the recent referendum campaign, spearheaded by Anne-Marie Flanagan and Dr. Margaret Kennedy, who was also an organising member of the Scrap the Green Paper Coalition, was amplified by individuals and organisations throughout the disability rights movement, throughout the entire sector. And it's this coming together of all different sectors, led from the ground up, that is the key. And I say this all the time. I don't believe in politicians. I firmly believe that change comes from the ground, led by the people. It always has, and it always will. Shelley is also part of this, the OG activists who did this, along with Martin Naughton, those who set up the first CILs and started the fight for independent living. Somewhere along the way with our organisations, we saw the NGOisation of the grassroots disability rights movement, which came to believe it needed to maybe grow up a bit, grow up out of its radical roots, focusing on policy and engaging with government in a more respectful manner, in a way that led to, we believe, too much compromise of ideals. Most disability organisations still prefer not to protest. And that was one of the reasons that members of our group who are frustrated by the lack of progression on issues such as, in particular here, personal assistance, wanted to protest the issue again, to get it out there in the media and to create more public awareness. People still don't even understand what a PA is. There's so much more that needs to be done. I'm sorry, I'm speaking so fast. Would you like me to slow down? Yeah, okay. We actually wanted to amplify and support the personal assistance campaign, which was more focused on a policy level run by ILMI, through a missing component, which was the protest element, which always helps to garner media attention. So we were trying to kind of work together in this ecosphere that we have of all the disability organizations and bring parts that might have been missing before. So we've helped to organise a few protests now, particularly with the Scrap the Green Paper Coalition. But our first, the one we did on April 24th, 2023 for personal assistance, is still my favourite because we really were just a handful of us rising up together. It was so small, there was only maybe 15, but each person, we were there with all of our presence, all of our impact, and disabled people with our chairs, we can take up a lot of space. So, chairs and guide dogs, so it can, just a small amount of people, we can create an impact. The title of the protest and campaign was 42 Minutes is Not Enough, reflecting the amount of PA time given to 44% of disabled participants in 2017, averaging only 42 minutes a day. It's abysmal. We also took to the streets in a symbolic gesture, retracing the route of the signatories to the Irish Republic, including the disabled Sean McDermott, Joseph Plunkett and James Connolly to the GPO, where the Irish Republic was declared around 108 years ago. At the GPO, we made our Declaration of Independent Living, written and delivered by our policy officer, Pat O'D, envisioning an Ireland where disabled people have our rights realised. It was an announcement that we are here to hearken the arrival of a more radical, uncompromising grassroots movement here in Ireland. And I think that this radical grassroots movement has now become revitalised. It's taken its own shape and form again in the ecosphere, with younger groups and lots of different people taking new approaches, being less willing to compromise in politics as well. We're seeing just people coming together more. And it continues to be nourished through all of these campaigns, through organisations, through events like the parade, the next of which, by the way, is on Saturday, July 20th in Dublin City Centre, and I hope some of you will make it to that. In terms of progressing the personal assistance campaign, it's important to note that alongside all of the newer DPOs, we face severe limitations due to a near complete lack of funding, even though state parties are required to produce this under the UNCRPD or to create opportunities for this. It's a big problem because consultation from DPOs is required for everything, really. It's supposed to be required at all levels of decision making, but this is almost always expected for free. This then only contributes further to our ridiculously high 70% unemployment rate for disabled people, because our lived expertise is not valued, and people here who are studying in disability rights might see the same thing now when they try and progress into employment, that it's hard to have that expertise recognized and valued, and something that you can be paid for. So yeah, most of the work we do is completely unfunded. This keeps us below the poverty line often, myself and most of the people involved in the group. So funding DPOs is an essential part of progressing the movement as a whole. And we ourselves would be able to progress this campaign, for example, a lot more with it, but we are hence very limited as to how much work we can take on. I personally would like to see all the groups who have a crucial role to play in progressing this fight, groups such as ILMI, for example, Shelley, being willing to work alongside us grassroots DPOs who are willing to protest in order to progress this campaign. We also need to come together to produce a bill to legislate for the right to personal assistance in line with Article 19 of the UNCRPD, to define it, to vastly increase hours for those which will actually be enough to enable participation in education, employment and social life, to streamline PA services, to remove the postcode lottery, get it out of the remit entirely of the HSE, for PA leaders to have more control over their service and perhaps be funded directly. We can look to Sweden for examples of this, who have legally enshrined the right to PAS, but apparently, as I was speaking to someone there in the audience today, that it's not the perfect international example either, and perhaps no perfect international examples exist. But as our policy officer, Paddy O'D once said as well, this doesn't mean that Ireland can't strive to become a first and leading example of how things should be. So we shouldn't let that in any way deter us that we don't have a good example yet. We have every reason to be one of the leaders in change. So I'd like to hand it over to you now. What do you think needs to happen in order for these issues to be progressed, for change to happen? Is there anyone even here who might be able to help DPOs and disability organisations to create a bill, bearing in mind funding limitations? And what are your thoughts on all of this? Thank you.
Thanks a million, Marianne, for your very insightful view on the PAS campaign. I'm glad to see that your time in ILMI has empowered you to go on and create direct action. And as for your comment there, would ILMI be very happy to get involved? We're constantly trying to make PA a legal right, but unfortunately we can't do that without legislation. So that's where we're really looking to try and strive, give that legal right to everyone that requires a personal assistant in the country. So thanks for that, Marianne, very insightful. Our next speaker is going to be Elizabeth Obati. I hope I pronounced that okay. Elizabeth Kamundia, sorry, Kamundia, Elizabeth Kamundia. Yeah. There. Yeah. Sorry. Elizabeth Kamundia works as a Deputy Director of the Disability Rights Division at the Human Rights Watch. She holds an LLB from the Faculty of Law, University of Victoria, and LLM in International and Cooperative Disability and Disability Law and Policy from the Centre for Disability Law and Policy, National University of Ireland, Galway, NUIG. Elizabeth has worked with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, Assistant Director for the Centre of Disability and Law and Policy, NUIG, Legal Researcher, and the Centre for Human Rights and University, there's that word again, Victoria Disability Rights and Law Schools Project Coordinator. She has also worked at the Commission on the implementation of the Constitution of Kenya. She has been a consultant on disability and the Committee of Experts on Constitutional Review, Kenya legal researcher. Elizabeth is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak again. I have enjoyed conversations with so many of you since yesterday, and I've heard many say how warm, welcoming, collaborative, and safe the space here feels. And so I wanted to thank the center for creating this, and really to thank all of us for making this feel like such a safe space for people to speak and share together. So I shared yesterday about the methodology at Human Rights Watch in terms of the work we do, the investigate, expose, change methodology. That once we've completed investigations into human rights violations, which is the fact-finding part, we typically expose what we have found, including through traditional and social media, and then we move on to the change part, which is the methodology, which is about engaging with our advocacy targets, right? So the part where we engage with policymakers and duty bearers. And on disability rights, one of the main challenges we face when engaging with advocacy targets is a lack of knowledge on disability, and frankly, sometimes stigma. And that's where the idea of the video that we are about to see came from. We wanted to show duty bearers that people with psychosocial disabilities, including people who have been locked away in institutional psychiatric facilities and also places where people are shackled in the past, can live meaningful lives in the community. So this video was shot in Ghana in October last year. And as you watch it, I'd like you to observe or to listen out for what the people in it identify as barriers as well as enablers for living in the community. So I'm happy for you to play the video now.
Freedom means waking up to do what I love without any restrictions, getting the necessary support, and also just feeling very liberated.
Human Rights Watch has been speaking with people who are locked up simply because they have a mental health condition to see how their lives have changed since returning home to their communities.
I love art, I love yoga, I love hiking. You know, I love Africa.
It's good to be back to the community. My family has been very supportive. The support is very important. Like if you get a supportive family and a supportive community where people don't stigmatize you or people don't criticize you.
In Ghana, like in many countries, people with psychosocial disabilities or mental health conditions face stigma on a daily basis. This stigma means people with psychosocial disabilities are often locked away in prayer camps and traditional healing centers where they may be subjected to shackling and other human rights abuses.
From what I remember, I was not happy to be there, being locked up in a room. I didn't remember being shackled, but I said I remember when they were taking it off. When they took it off, and I'll go back into the room and they will lock the door. The day in the room alone during the night, I really didn't like that experience, being alone, locked up.
People with psychosocial disabilities should not be locked up or shackled. Instead, the government should support them to live in the community. Since 2011, Human Rights Watch has been documenting what life is like for people with psychosocial disabilities when locked away, often in chains.
I was there for 2 years. You know, during those times too, my children were not all that old. So I think of them a lot. So I sometimes cry bitterly with loud voice, calling them that this is my situation.
I have not been shackled, but I've been physically restrained, about 4, 5 strong men holding me down for me to receive injections that were not necessary.
Human Rights Watch found that families often take people with real or perceived psychosocial disabilities to faith-based or traditional healers because of the widely held beliefs that such disabilities are caused by curses or evil spirits, and because their communities have limited, if any, mental health services.
The quality of care has to be improved.
In our country, there's so many misconceptions about mental health. I think education is very important.
Yeah, I have been ostracized a lot. There were times where I lost employment opportunities, and it affected almost all aspects of my life.
The Ghanaian government should provide rights-respecting mental health services at the community level and ensure that people with psychosocial disabilities get adequate support for housing, independent living, and job training.
Good community means community which is decent. You do things on your own. You can socialize at any place that you want to. And you can attend churches. That's what I know is a good community. You have your freedom, you have your peace. You can move about freely.
I'm really happy when I'm able to achieve something and I get good results from it. Something I enjoy doing, like maybe swimming or cooking, something that releases stress or helps me to relax. I also love to see family and friends to make me happy. In the future, I'm hoping that the awareness will be created and the stigma will be reduced and people will be much more enlightened about mental health issues and how to offer support, especially when the person is going through a crisis.
People close to me, they're very, very supportive because they understand and they have seen my growth. Being independent is a must. It's something that we all have to demand and have so that you can actually, be yourself, live your best life, to the fullest.
So I wanted to unpack a couple of things from the video and to share some reflections. And I'll focus mostly perhaps on the enablers or sort of what it takes to live in the community. And in no particular order, just kind of things that stand out to me. And so I think the first thing that I'd like to name is the whole issue of being isolated, being removed from your community, being set apart from life, from simple, small, daily things that we take for granted. When I asked, so during this trip where we shot this video, the other part of it was going to the actual places where people are chained and locked away. So there was the part that was speaking to people who are now living in the community, making the video, and there was a part where it was kind of documenting the violations that you saw. So when I interviewed the 3 people that we've seen on screen and I asked them, was there anything so describe your experience when you were locked away, and was there anything positive, right? Like, was it all really, really as, horrible as what we've seen, or was there anything, from the camps that you thought was positive? And one of the responses that I got was that one thing that was positive in the camps as opposed to psychiatric facilities is being able to go with your family. So actually, in the prayer camps, often you can bring your mother or your sister or the person that supports you who will then cook for you. And so you, and so I remember being really confused and thinking to myself, like, but why do we need to remove people from the places where they have support in order to, cut them off from their day-to-day lives and sort of, take them away in places where they are then locked away. But I thought that was striking, that idea that someone would prefer a healing camp because you can come with your support as opposed to the psychiatric facilities there. The other thing that struck me, of course, was is sort of one of the main recommendations we give to policymakers when we meet with them is that they need to develop good and solid community-based support services. So services, be it mental health services, be it all other kinds of services, but situated within the community. And I think part of that has been sort of hearing policymakers ask, but what does that look like, right? Like, what do good community-based support mental health services look like? And we've documented a couple of sort of good practices, and I think the World Health Organization did a really good job compiling good community-based mental health services from around the world. So Global North, Global South, a compilation of those. And Human Rights Watch has documented one in Toronto, Canada, called the Gastein Crisis Center. And it's a mental health support service that responds to people during a crisis situation and that avoids police responses to crisis. And I think it would be interesting to look into it for anyone who's interested, because I think what that does is that then it stops the situation where someone is then, taken to long stay facilities, because then it offers a place to deal with the immediate crisis, and then people can be supported to move back into their communities and to keep carrying on with their day-to-day lives. So I think one thing that came to me when I was shooting this video is sort of the need for us to create alternatives that are culturally appropriate, right? Like that are also feasible, so that when you're speaking with an advocacy target, when I'm speaking with the Deputy Minister for Health in Ghana, they can really see how it would work, right? Like in terms of, the resources it will take, the expertise that is needed, but that we do need ways to support people to live in the community. The other thing that struck me was employment and sort of the centrality of employment. And this is also from the conversations that I had as part of the interviews for the making of this video. And Abina shared here the difficulty of the difficulties she has experienced with employment. One of the things she said was, I have lost employment opportunities within the video, and we delved into that a bit more. And so one of my reflections then is about work and employment and how we can make employment spaces where how we can make employment possible for people with disabilities. And now thinking broadly beyond psychosocial disability, I think I took from your presentation the question of personal assistance, right? If you have 48 hours of minutes of personal assistance per day, how will that really support someone to work and be employed, right? And if you have so little control over the service that you're getting in terms of, personal assistance services. Now I'm kind of broadening out of the space that I was in of psychosocial disability only, but just thinking about what it takes across disability to be able to work and be employed, because work is meaning, it's contribution, it's so central in many ways to our lives. And so at the time of shooting the video, Abina had found an employer who was a lot more flexible, allowed her to work flexible hours and to contribute. And I think that matters hugely. So that question of work and the real supports for people to be able to stay in work. The other thought that I had is the intersection of aging and disability. So the male character in the video shared about his concern about insecurity in older age. And one sort of personal reflection that I'd offer, or that I'd like to share, and oh my goodness, the time, yes, is that my father had a psychosocial disability. So my father lived with a psychosocial disability. He passed away now in 2016, but I also come to the work from that perspective. So when I was in Ghana doing the interviews, I did keep thinking to myself, particularly when I was interviewing Bernard. And I know, obviously, in academic settings and objectivity and research and all of that, but really the reality of it when you're in the field, yes, obviously you don't want to project your own sort of experiences, but it is not possible, I don't think, to completely separate the personal experiences that you've had from the work that you do. And so I remembered, my father once telling me because he spent quite a lot of time in a psychiatric facility towards the end of his life. And I remember he said to me at one point when I went to see him there, he said, I used to be somebody. I used to be a person. And because he had had a career, he had taught his whole life, but it's upon retirement, without the structure and just the meaning and the contribution that is work, that had really kind of been an important part of his life. It's when that went that things really, really became difficult for him. And so I've thought a lot, we also obviously work on older people's rights at Human Rights Watch, and kind of document how life in older age can be marked by loss and sort of beginning to think about questioning that, right? Like questioning that and thinking about those intersections as we grow older. How can we build societies that do not discriminate also on the basis of age? Why is it necessary, and I know I'm going off on a trajectory tangent now, but why is it necessary to have mandatory retirement ages, a random arbitrary cutoff point beyond which you're removed from participation in public life without maybe opportunities to contribute in different ways, right? Because I saw how devastating that was in the personal context of my father. And then, I think the other reflection is around addressing stigma. In many communities, people are locked away because of stigma. I think Mimi mentioned it quite a bit in the video, and Article 8 places an obligation on states to raise awareness, and I think this is critical. The Mental Health Authority in Ghana is doing this. It has programs to raise awareness, and I think it's also an important role for people with disabilities and their representative organizations, and many in Ghana are playing that role as well of raising awareness. The other thing I would say about awareness raising is also it needs to be really context specific. So one thing that we are exploring is having faith leaders speak about stigma in contexts where they are very respected and sort of speak about mental health. So having conversations with faith leaders that can lead them to take a human rights-based approach when they speak to their congregations, and giving sermons about, would Jesus do this? Would he chain people, And that can resonate much more deeply than saying the CRPD says, the right to liberty, right? And so it's kind of on freedom of movement and the specifics of it. So it's kind of finding what works in a particular context. The other thing I would like to mention, and I know at this stage I'm out of time because it was 2 minutes ago, some time back, but so just quickly, is human rights education and capacity building. So Ghana is one of the first countries that the World Health Organization introduced their Quality Rights Initiative, and they trained medical professionals in mental health about a human rights approach to mental health. And when we visited Accra Psychiatric Facility, that was in 2022, we met with psychiatrists who had really been influenced by this training and who were approaching their work quite differently because of the WHO Quality Rights Initiative and because of the training that they had received. And so that's an important part of it as well. The other 2 points I'll just mention, and maybe they can come up in the question and answer, is social protection and housing support. So support with housing, because one pushback I've heard from the Mental Health Authority when engaging with them, and when I've asked, why don't you just shut down these places? They are terrible and the law allows you to do it. And they say to me, yes, but take the people who are there where? Yes, we can shut it down, but where will we take the people? And it does make you pause, right? And it does make you see how many systems need to work together, including the housing system, including, it's not as simple as shutting it down because it doesn't meet standards. If you're not offering a solution for how people are going to live in the community, if their families are not able to take them in, if they don't have any family members, when there's so much stigma in the particular societies that they come from. So I'll stop there. Thank you.